Hi, I'm Wyatt Cash, Vice President for Content Strategy with FedScoop, and we're here today at the IACT Executive Leadership Conference in Williamsburg. And today I'm pleased to have David Bray join us. David is the 2015 Eisenhower Fellow for Taiwan and Australia, and also is known as the CIO at the FCC. So welcome, David.
Thanks for having me, Wyatt.
Appreciate it. So we want to talk a little bit about some of the themes here. Some of them have been about emerging technologies and innovation, and wondered if you could share a little bit about some of what you're seeing literally globally that might kind of add a little extra perspective to what they're talking about today.
Sure. So I was fortunate enough to be a 2015 Eisenhower Fellow to Taiwan and Australia for 5 weeks. It was outside of my work capacity, and meet with the ministers of communication, justice, and defense in both countries, as well as their industry. And in Australia, we were talking about the Internet of Everything and how it might actually change how they deliver healthcare, because they're really interested in that, as well as how it might actually change how does industry do mining and services such as that. And Australia was really asking the interesting question about how do we separate the setting of permissions in terms of privacy and information sharing, which right now we often co-locate onto platforms that actually store the data. How can we separate that from where the data is actually stored? So you could imagine in the future you might be able to say to an app or an agent, I want to have this information shared with this information, I give my permission to do it, but it's not specifically linked to the data, and so you're actually brokering it. So it might very well be, you get an example for some company would like to have access to your healthcare data and you say no, and it says okay, but let's say you're in a car accident, maybe you want to say yes, or let's say your heart rate drops below 30 beats a minute and I detect that on whatever device you have, and you'd be willing to say yes. So it's really about giving more granularity in terms of control to the individual about what they want to share with the Internet of Everything. Taiwan, where they're actually building a lot of these devices, Taiwan was actually asking the question that as we go from right now on the face of the planet, we have about 14 billion network devices on the face of the planet relative to 7.3 billion human beings. And in 2020, anywhere between 50 to 200 billion, according to some statistics. They asked a question about how are we actually even going to try and approach having resiliency, if not security, because it may be that you can't have 100% security with the Internet of Everything just because of the nature of the protocols and the size, but can you at least detect the health of the Internet of Everything? And so they were actually talking about maybe we could do like a cyber public health approach where we know signs, symptoms, and it's almost like the demographics, but we don't know the specifics. We leave that to the organization. And so organizations can take care of their own specific devices, but they're sharing information about what are the natures of the behaviors we're seeing in real time, so you know where best to actually focus on your efforts to try and make things more resilient.
Mm-hmm. So bringing it back a little closer to home, so how are you seeing these kinds of capabilities getting traction at federal government agencies, or even specifically at the FCC?
So I think what's really happening is we've got to think about new ways of working together, and that's what's actually great about ACT-IAC, is it really is the private sector plus public service, and really also thinking about involving individuals. I mean, the example in Australia, it was actually a case of empowering individuals to make choices. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about government delivering services, but the individuals can actually give feedback and actually make their own choices about what they want to do. And that's game-changing. It's worth pointing out, back in the 1700s, packet latency, which was on horseback, was 3 days between New York and DC, and that was just one way. But now we can actually work anywhere and everywhere. And so at the FCC, back in late 2013, we did a little experiment, which was we wanted to be able to have people, if they wanted to, download an app, actually monitor their connection speed, and if they wanted to, they could then share it anonymously with the FCC. Now, this was late 2013. So one thing we did to gain trust is we made the app open source. Now, not many people are going to go to GitHub, although the code's there. Enough people did, and they actually said, well, by design, they're not collecting your IP address, and they don't know who you are in a 5-mile radius. But if you choose to download the app, you can actually inform policy making at the FCC. Ended up, for a while, we actually had it be the 4th most downloaded app right behind Google Chrome on the iOS store. So people are hungry, and that's actually informing policy making, and so we don't actually have to pay for cars to drive around or people to actually go out and take these measurements. The public, if they want to, can give inputs. And we actually saw like North Dakota, Alaska, the entire United States was willing to participate. So I think that sort of idea that the public can actually feed information back that makes public service better, that's one thing to think about. The other thing is actually, I think in the past, it's interesting. In the United States, we want you to clearly be either government, professional, or industry. That's not the case, say, in the UK or Singapore, where they have quasi-government partnerships and things like that. I wonder if in the United States, we may need to think of new creative ways of actually organizing joint partnerships that may also involve the public directly to experiment with these new efforts going forward with the Internet of Everything.
It's an interesting point. Certainly part of the discussions going on here is just sharing good creative ideas, right? So,
right.
Well, Switching gears a little bit, you know, a lot of the challenge of capitalizing on this information is the dilemma of legacy systems. Your agency's been kind of on the forefront of tapping the advantages of the cloud. Can you just give us a little update on where you are with that?
Sure. So when I arrived 2 years ago, FCC was, as you noted, was quite in a state where we had, for 750 people, we had 207 systems. So one system for every 9 people, and they were more than 10 years old on average. And I could have probably spent the time individually updating them, and it would have probably taken 5 years, and I'd have to do it all over again. But we decided to do it almost like an intervention, which was one, I wanted to listen to people and understand, but we wanted to first sort of reduce the portfolio that we had. So we were able to reduce that 207 by retiring some systems, by consolidating some, to about 100. And then 2, we wanted to do a proof of concept at the same time where we could actually go straight to the cloud. And so our consumer help desk, which was 15 years old, we were actually able to show that by not doing it on premise, if we had done a new one on premise, it would have been about 3.2 million. Instead, we went straight to the cloud, and including contractor time was only 450,000. The other estimate was it was going to take 1.5 years to do if we did it on premise. We did it for less than 6 months. In fact, it was only 2 months of actual development, and the other 4 months was just adapting to new ways of interacting. So that showed we could go to the cloud, it would be more effective, and also get us more scale and resiliency. So over Labor Day weekend is when we made the big shift, which was we literally powered everything off on Thursday at 2 p.m. Some things we actually moved to more modernized platforms. We retired 2 servers that were 11 years old that weighed 1 ton each. They were E25K Sun servers.
Wow, amazing.
So we retired those. We didn't have to move those. But it still took 200 servers out of what has been 300 servers, 400 applications. We loaded it up into 7 different trucks and literally drove them to a commercial facility. Now, some we were able to go straight to the cloud, so they're not even hosted on servers anymore. Some, they're still too old. They were 32-bit applications, so we couldn't retire them yet. But now they're at a commercial facility, as we make the move to the cloud over the next year, we can literally take those server racks out of the commercial facility and immediately see return on investment because we don't have to maintain it anymore.
That's great. Well, lastly, you're working on a lot of projects, I'm sure. What's one of the ones you're most excited about right now?
So 2 things, actually 3. First, we've been very attentive over the last year of listening to all the different stakeholders that use FCC's web services. And that includes the website content and the applications. Now, there are a lot of them out there, and there's no one-size-fits-all, but we're actually rolling out the new refresh of the FCC.gov. If people go to prototype.fcc.gov, we're being very intentional about not turning the switch cold turkey, but we actually want people to give input so they can actually feed into it. And that's been in the making because you can imagine we have everyone ranging from engineers to lawyers to the general public and trying to take all the things that FCC does, which is literally all things communication, wired, wireless, satellites. Yes. It's trying to fit that together. So I'm happy that the team has taken the time to listen to that. We're also on prototype.fcc.gov. If you go to /ECFS, Electronic Commenting Filing System, ECFS, we're rolling out a successor to what is now a 17 going on 18-year-old system for electronic commenting that the FCC has so the public can give input. So again, we want people to play with it. It's beta. It's not fully baked yet. But the whole intent is, 1, it should be rolled out after a lot of input, and then 2, it should be an agile model where we continue to update it once it's out there. The third is really now that we have made the investment to have no servers on site at the FCC anymore, that we've either gone to a cloud or commercial provider, we really want to get out of being application-centric, and I really believe it needs to be data-centric. This ties back into the Internet of Everything. You can only really make value of the Internet of Everything if you're focusing on the data versus the application. So our licensing systems, and we have about 20 of them, the most common one is Universal Licensing System, ULS. We're going to do the same thing we've done already for the consumer help desk, what we've done for electronic commenting filing system. It's going to be modular building blocks over the next year, where we'll try and begin to update individual pieces to the cloud over time. And so that ideally within a year, maybe a year and then maybe 3 months, after 1 year and 3 months, then you finally have the overall building blocks for all 20 different systems so I can retire all of those and again, save money and be more effective.
Well, you'll be on the vanguard of retiring systems because that's always the problem. We get new ideas, but we don't always retire the old systems either. So, well, I wish you good luck with that. And David, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Wyatt.
This is Wyatt Cash with FedScoop. You can see more of our coverage on fedscoop.com. Thanks for joining us.